What's up, guys? Today we are talking about Equisetum hyemale, commonly known as horsetail. Let's go. So horsetail is a really unique plant. It's got a lot of attributes that kind of differentiate it a lot from other plants that you would typically see in the landscape. Now, besides just being an ornamental plant for the landscape, it also has some medicinal purposes, some culinary uses, but we're really just gonna focus on the ornamental qualities of the horsetail. Now, it's got a few common names that it can go by, sometimes rough horsetail, scouring rush, snake rush. So when you're looking at purchasing, be sure you're getting the right one. Try to order it by the botanical name. First off, you can see right away the structure of this plant is incredibly unique. It's got a long, slender stem that have even sections with a little black ring around it. And if you look closely, that black ring is actually the leaves of the plant. And the color of the foliage is really a nice, vibrant green. It looks very lush, and the stems are rigid and upright and beautiful, and it just really makes a pretty bold statement. Now, what differentiates this from other plants? Well, lots of things. But first, let's start off with some very important factors that you have to take into consideration when thinking about planting the Equisetum. First, this plant is actually pretty invasive. It spreads very rapidly and aggressively, and it will tend to choke out other plants that are in its wake. So if you're thinking about using it next to other plants and smaller growing perennials and whatnot, this plant will probably eat them alive. It actually spreads by underground rhizomes or runners, and it also sends off spores. So the fact that it uses those spores in reproduction kind of puts it in more closer relation to ferns. But they're not quite a fern, they're actually just a bizarre vascular plant dating back to the Paleozoic era, and we know this because folks have uncovered fossils of this plant. So you're kind of looking at the dinosaur of plants, if you will. It's a very unique and interesting plant with a lot of history. All right, you guys have heard some basics. Now let's look at the quick facts. Equisetum will thrive the best in USDA zones 4 through 9. Horsetail is considered evergreen. This plant will get about 4 to 6 feet tall, but is often kept much shorter. Plant horsetail in either sun or full shade. Equisetum likes moderate to regular water. This plant is native to North America. And in other notes, this plant is considered invasive in some aspects, and ingested in large quantities could prove to be toxic. How do we use horsetail in the landscape? It's a beautiful plant, it's bold, it's dynamic, but it's also incredibly invasive. So what do we do with that? I recommend not to plant it just in the open landscape where it has free reign of everything and can just go wild and berserk. Keep it in a pot or a planter where it can just take over and fill up that entire container or space, and let that be just a single specimen. It looks really dynamic when it's just by itself creating a big green mass. It really highlights and complements architecture that way. It works very well in narrow planters. It has foliage that stands upright as opposed to, lots of other perennials and shrubs that, they tend to want to grow out or even spill over. If you need a plant that just stays very upright with rigid stems, this one might be the right selection for you. And if you do decide to use a container to plant it in, be very careful of the proximity of that container to other planter spaces. It can potentially start to invade other spaces around that planter. So be very cautious of where this plant goes. All right, now stylistically, how do we use Equisetum? Well, I really like to use it in a modern landscape. Because of the clean architectural vertical lines it creates, it complements modern architecture really well. So if you have a large boring concrete wall, the Equisetum can soften it. It just has such a cool impact, especially if you have some kind of colorful wall that it's going in front of, and it just creates that contrast. It just pops. But again, to reiterate, be careful how and where you use it, because it is a vigorous spreader. Thank you guys for joining me today. I appreciate you hanging out with me on another video. Hopefully this was helpful to you somehow and got you thinking a little bit more about if this plant was right for you guys in your own project. If you have not yet been to the website, go to budgetplants.com where we've got this plant and many others, and hey, you can buy them there. I will see you on the next video, and in the meantime, happy planting.